The frigid winter date of January 3, 1943, witnessed an event that would challenge everything medical science understood about human survival. High above the occupied territories of France, soaring at an altitude exceeding 20,000 feet, an American B-17 flying fortress transformed into a blazing inferno against the steel-gray sky. Trapped within the aircraft's tail section, young gunner Alan Magee confronted an impossible choice as flames consumed the metal chamber. Around him, without access to his parachute, and with the searing heat threatening to end his life within moments, he faced a decision no human should ever contemplate: remain and succumb to the fire, or leap into the void knowing that the fall itself meant certain death. In that desperate instant, Magee chose the latter option. The subsequent half-minute would generate a medical mystery that physicians and scientists continue studying decades later, as this young airman accomplished something that violated every known principle of physics and human physiology. This remarkable account chronicles how one man plummeted from the heavens, without any means of slowing his descent, struck the earth traveling at speeds that should have instantly killed him, yet somehow lived to share his extraordinary experience. The medical discoveries made during his examination revealed findings that astounded the entire scientific community. Born on the 13th of January in 1919, Alan Eugene Magee entered the world in Plainfield, New Jersey, as part of an Irish-American household struggling against the harsh economic realities of the Great Depression era. His father earned modest wages laboring within a textile manufacturing facility, while his mother devoted herself to nurturing 5 children within the cramped confines of their small apartment dwelling. Financial resources remained perpetually scarce throughout his childhood, yet the family's capacity for dreaming remained boundless and undiminished by their circumstances. Young Alan developed an intense fascination with aircraft and aviation from his earliest years. During the 1920s and throughout the 1930s, flying represented humanity's newest frontier and exciting, almost mystical achievement that captured imaginations worldwide. Charles Lindbergh's legendary solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927, accomplished when Alan had reached merely 8 years of age, transformed aviation from fantasy into tangible reality. Amelia Earhart pursued and shattered record after record. The open sky symbolized liberation, adventure, and an escape route from the grinding poverty and limited opportunities that defined existence in Plainfield. Alan devoted countless hours positioned in nearby fields, watching aircraft pass overhead while his imagination soared alongside them. He meticulously assembled collections of newspaper articles featuring renowned aviators, constructed miniature airplane models from whatever wood scraps and paper he could gather, and fantasized about the approaching day when he too would command the skies. However, harsh economic realities intervened in his aspiration. Upon reaching 17 years of age, financial necessity forced Alan to abandon his formal education and enter the workforce. He cycled through various positions: automotive mechanic, warehouse laborer, factory operative. Each job demanded exhausting physical effort while providing inadequate compensation and offering zero prospects for advancement or improvement. Despite these setbacks, Alan refused to relinquish his aviation dreams. By 1940, as European nations descended into the catastrophic conflict that would define the decade, Alan secured employment as a mechanic in Newark. Radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines carried stories of British bomber crews striking German industrial targets, of American volunteer pilots joining foreign air forces to combat fascism. Though the war remained geographically distant, Alan sensed instinctively that America's involvement was inevitable. December 7, 1941, transformed everything when Japanese forces launched their devastating assault on Pearl Harbor. Japan had violated American sovereignty and brought warfare directly to the nation's doorstep. Within 24 hours, the United States formally declared war on the Axis powers. Alan, having recently celebrated his 22nd birthday, understood immediately what his response must be. During January of 1942, he formally enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. Finally, after years of longing, his childhood dream approached realization. He would experience flight, though not in the capacity he had originally imagined. Pilot positions required collegiate education that Alan's economic background had prevented him from obtaining. Instead, military authorities assigned him to train as a bomber gunner, a role equally vital to the war effort. The training regimen proved exceptionally demanding and comprehensive. Alan mastered operation of the devastating .50 caliber machine gun, learned to identify enemy aircraft silhouettes at extreme distances, studied ballistic trajectories and firing solutions, and trained for survival at altitudes where human life cannot naturally exist. He endured practice sessions in sub-zero conditions, became proficient with supplemental oxygen equipment, and rehearsed emergency protocols repeatedly. Nevertheless, no amount of training could adequately prepare anyone for the terrifying reality of aerial combat. October 1942 brought Alan's assignment to the 360th Bombardment Squadron, part of the 303rd Bombardment Group serving within the mighty 8th Air Force. He would occupy the tail gunner position aboard a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, the legendary American heavy bomber that was carrying the fight directly into Nazi Germany's heartland. The tail gunner's station represented one of aviation's most isolated, confined, and lethally dangerous positions. Seated alone in the aircraft's extreme rear section, physically separated from fellow crew members by the fuselage, the tail gunner served as the primary defense against enemy fighters attacking from the rear quadrant. Statistical analysis revealed this position suffered among the highest casualty rates of any crew position. Alan dismissed such concerns entirely. He was flying. He was contributing meaningfully to the war effort. He was experiencing his lifelong dream made manifest, even acknowledging that mathematical probability suggested he might not survive the 25 missions required to complete a standard combat tour couldn't diminish his determination. His inaugural combat mission, launched in November 1942, targeting the heavily defended port of Saint-Nazaire, France. The flight proved absolutely terrifying in ways training had never approximated. Dense anti-aircraft fire created black clouds of explosive fragments throughout their flight path. German fighter aircraft darted through the bomber formations. Extreme cold penetrated every layer of protective clothing, and constant fear gnawed at every crew member's concentration. But Alan survived that first mission. Additional sorties followed in rapid succession. Each mission represented a deadly lottery where fate determined outcomes. Some bombers returned essentially undamaged. Others limped home riddled with bullet holes, engines trailing smoke and fire, crews suffering terrible wounds. Some aircraft and their crews simply vanished, never returning to base. On January 3, 1943, Alan Magee prepared for what would become his 7th combat mission and operation that would transform him from an anonymous soldier into a medical phenomenon. Studied worldwide. The morning of January 3, 1943, arrived bitterly cold and obscured by heavy fog blanketing Molesworth Air Base in England. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Frost coated the B-17 bombers positioned along the runway. Ground crews worked methodically, preparing aircraft for the day's assigned mission. The target, Saint-Nazaire, France. Once again, German U-boats operated from massively fortified submarine pens constructed there, sinking Allied merchant vessels throughout the Atlantic Ocean. These bases featured reinforced concrete walls so impossibly thick that conventional bombs barely scratched their surfaces, yet Allied command persisted in attacking them. Alan donned his flight equipment methodically: a thermally insulated jumpsuit, heavy leather jacket, wool-lined boots extending past his ankles, thick gloves, a leather helmet, and protective aviator goggles. Over this ensemble, he strapped an inflatable life vest and parachute harness. The parachute itself, that crucial piece of survival equipment that could preserve his life if circumstances forced him to abandon the aircraft, presented a significant problem in the tail gunner's cramped position. The space was so restrictive that Alan couldn't wear the parachute pack during flight operations. Instead, he stored it forward in the fuselage, planning to retrieve it only if emergency evacuation became necessary. At precisely 9:15 that morning, the B-17 engines thundered to life across the airfield. Individual bombers taxied sequentially toward the main runway. 19 flying fortresses from the 360th Squadron lifted off, climbing through the gray overcast while assembling into their defensive formation pattern. Alan's aircraft, nicknamed Snap, Crackle, Pop, due to the distinctive sounds its engines produced, assumed its designated position within the formation. 10 men comprised the crew: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners including Alan. The flight across the English Channel proceeded tensely, but without incident. However, upon penetrating German-controlled airspace, every crew member shifted to maximum alertness. Alan continuously scanned the sky through his tail-positioned small windows, searching for the unmistakable silhouettes of Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf fighters. At approximately 10:47 that morning, with the formation cruising at roughly 20,000 feet above French territory. Catastrophe erupted without warning. Bandits! 6 o'clock. Alan's urgent voice crackled through the aircraft intercom system. He had spotted German interceptors approaching from directly astern. Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters dove aggressively through the bomber formation's defensive pattern. Tracer rounds carved brilliant lines through the atmosphere. The thunderous sound of 50-caliber machine guns firing created deafening percussion. Throughout the aircraft, acrid smells of burning gunpowder and overheated lubricating oil permeated the fuselage. Alan fired his machine gun in carefully controlled bursts, tracking the trajectories of attacking fighters with practiced precision. He observed his tracer round strike one Bf-109, which immediately broke away, trailing dark smoke from its engine cowling. But numerous additional fighters pressed their attacks relentlessly. Wave after wave of German interceptors slashed through the American formation. The snap, crackle, pop, sustained hits initially in engine number 3, which immediately began spewing thick black smoke indicating catastrophic damage. Moments later, engine number 2 also took direct hits. The mighty bomber began losing altitude rapidly, falling behind the formation's protective envelope. German fighters, like predatory sharks detecting wounded prey, concentrated their firepower on the crippled bomber. Additional strikes followed in rapid succession. The starboard wing suffered severe damage, tearing open fuel tanks. Fire erupted along the wing, with yellow and orange flames consuming the aluminum structure. Prepare to abandon aircraft. The pilot's command rang through the intercom with desperate urgency. I repeat, abandon aircraft immediately. Alan needed to evacuate his tail position, crawl forward through the burning fuselage, and recover his parachute from where he'd stored it. But when he attempted to move, terror gripped him as he discovered something catastrophic. The door separating his tail compartment from the aircraft's main fuselage had become jammed shut. Damaged by bullet impacts and structural deformation, he was completely trapped. Flames surged closer toward his position. Toxic smoke filled the confined compartment, burning his lungs with each increasingly difficult breath. Temperature rose with terrifying speed. Alan pounded desperately against the jammed door with all his strength, but the barrier refused to yield. His parachute, his only means of survival, remained inaccessible on the opposite side of that immovable door. When fellow prisoners and surviving crew members finally laid eyes upon Alan, shattered, wrapped extensively in medical dressings, hovering barely at the threshold of consciousness, yet unmistakably drawing breath, a profound silence descended upon the assembled group. The co-pilot, his voice trembling with disbelief, eventually found words to ask the question weighing on everyone's mind. Did you truly leap from the aircraft without any parachute? Alan managed a weak affirmative gesture. And you actually survived striking the earth? Came another incredulous query. Again, Alan nodded slowly. The pilot, his voice barely above a whisper, spoke with genuine reverence. Magee, you represent either the most fortunate or divinely protected individual I have encountered throughout my entire existence. Perhaps you embody both qualities simultaneously. By April of 1943, a full 3 months following the catastrophic crash, Alan had recuperated sufficiently to withstand relocation. Military authorities transferred him to Stalag 17B, situated in Krems, Austria, a detention facility specifically designed for captured Allied aircrew members. His ordeal remained far from concluded, but he remained among the living to experience whatever lay ahead. Stalag 17B occupied territory near Krems, Austria, positioned roughly 60 kilometers distant from Vienna. Originally engineered to accommodate 4,000 prisoners, the facility routinely confined more than 10,000 captives within its perimeter. Existence proved brutally harsh. Inadequate nutritional provisions, severely overcrowded sleeping quarters, punishing winter temperatures, and oppressively scorching summer conditions. When Alan arrived during April 1943, his physical state remained gravely compromised. His right arm remained immobilized in medical apparatus. His right leg refused to properly support his body weight. His ribcage generated sharp pain with each respiratory cycle. He required assistance performing even the most fundamental daily activities. However, fellow captives immediately embraced responsibility for his welfare. Among aircrews, an unspoken code of mutual support existed universally. These men had confronted identical lethal skies, faced the same relentless German interceptors, experienced the same paralyzing terror watching comrades' aircraft disintegrate mid-flight. Alan belonged to their brotherhood, and his extraordinary account, leaping without parachute from 20, 1,000 feet elevation, and somehow, surviving propagated rapidly throughout the entire camp. Population he transformed into something approaching a legendary figure among the imprisoned men. "That's Magee," prisoners murmured as he laboriously limped past their barracks. "The aviator who plummeted from the heavens." Numerous individuals requested hearing the complete narrative directly from his own lips. Alan, possessing naturally humble temperament, consistently minimized the extraordinary nature of events. "Fortune smiled upon me," he would explain dismissively. "I struck something that arrested my descent. Nothing more remarkable than that." Yet others interpreted circumstances quite differently. Within an environment where men confronted daily despair, gnawing hunger, spreading disease, and agonizing uncertainty regarding whether they would ever reunite with their families, Alan's survival represented a powerful symbol of hope. If he could somehow survive circumstances that defied every logical expectation, perhaps they too possessed the capacity to endure the horrors of imprisonment. Alan gradually regained physical strength through determination and persistence. He participated enthusiastically in makeshift rehabilitation exercises devised by fellow prisoners. He circumnavigated the camp's perimeter repeatedly, compelling his weakened leg to rebuild muscular capacity. He practiced controlled movements with his previously shattered arm as healing progressed. The medical care system within the camp remained rudimentary at best. Prisoner physicians, themselves captives, performed admirably with severely limited resources and supplies. However, Alan's physical impairments never disappeared entirely. He suffered from persistent chronic pain throughout his damaged tissues. His compromised lung significantly restricted his endurance capacity. Premature arthritis established itself within his previously fractured joints. Nevertheless, he remained alive and absolutely determined to maintain that status until circumstances permitted his return home. Daily routine at Stalag 170 followed monotonous, yet rigidly enforced structure. Twice daily roll calls required prisoners to assemble in formation for meticulous counting. Rations underwent distribution: coarse black bread, watery soup devoid of substantial nutrition, occasionally supplemented with potatoes or unidentifiable meat of questionable origin. Mandatory forced labor awaited some prisoners. Whatever time remained available was devoted to improvised recreational activities, theatrical performances, educational classes, adapted sporting competitions. Alan, given his restricted mobility, received exemption from work assignments. This circumstance represented simultaneously both blessing and curse. A blessing because compulsory labor proved exhausting and potentially dangerous. A curse because excessive idle time permitted his mind to drift toward dark contemplation. He thought constantly about his family. Did they possess knowledge of his survival? Had American military authorities notified them regarding his capture? Or did they continue believing he had perished during that January mission? In reality, Alan's family initially received official notification during January 1943 classifying him as missing in action. Only during May did they learn through International Red Cross channels that he remained alive. Though imprisoned, his mother's overwhelming relief transcended verbal description. The winter spanning 1943 into 1944 proved especially merciless and brutal. Temperatures plummeted dramatically below freezing thresholds. The camp's heating infrastructure remained woefully inadequate. Men slept huddled together beneath threadbare blankets, shivering violently throughout endless nights. Respiratory ailments spread with alarming rapidity through the overcrowded barracks. Alan's existing injuries rendered him particularly susceptible to illness. His damaged pulmonary system struggled desperately in the frigid atmosphere. He developed severe bronchitis that nearly extinguished his life entirely. Only the dedicated, selfless care provided by fellow prisoners and captive physicians succeeded in pulling him back from death's threshold. Spring's eventual arrival brought modest relief from winter's cruelty. Temperatures climbed upward, rations improved marginally, and fragmentary news infiltrated the camp through clandestine channels. The Allied forces were prevailing slowly, painfully, but undeniably advancing toward victory. Alan clung desperately to that precious hope. The year 1944 crawled forward with agonizing slowness for Stalag 170's prisoners. Each sunrise presented another test of physical endurance and mental fortitude. Alan Magee maintained his resolve, his wounds healing incrementally though never achieving complete restoration. War news arrived via secretly constructed radios that prisoners had ingeniously assembled from scavenged components. The monumental D-Day invasion during June 1944. Paris's liberation in August. These reports documented Allied forces advancing steadily, Through Western Europe, from the Eastern Front, Soviet armies drove German forces remorselessly backward toward Berlin. For imprisoned men, each report of Allied triumph brought renewed optimism, but also mounting anxiety. What actions would desperate Germans take regarding thousands of prisoners? When defeat became absolutely inevitable, throughout the winter of 1944-45, conditions within the camp deteriorated catastrophically. Germany found itself crushed between two colossal military forces, converging from opposite directions. Resources dwindled to critical levels. Prisoner rations, already grossly insufficient, underwent further severe reduction. Men attempted surviving on fewer than 1,000 calories daily. Alan, whose metabolic processes remained compromised from extensive injuries, suffered particularly acutely. He shed additional weight his skeletal frame could scarcely afford losing. His ribcage protruded visibly through emaciated skin. Energy reserves approached exhaustion, yet he adamantly refused surrendering to despair. "I've journeyed too far through suffering to abandon hope now," he informed concerned comrades worried about his declining physical condition. During January 1945, persistent rumors circulated that Soviet forces were approaching Austrian territory. German guards exhibited increasing nervousness and volatility. Some discussed openly the possibility of evacuating the facility before Russian troops arrived. In April 1945, these whispered rumors crystallized into terrible reality. The German camp commander assembled prisoners to announce grimly, "Evacuation procedures will commence immediately. Prepare yourselves for extended marching." These forced evacuations earned the designation death marches, compulsory movements of prisoners. As German forces retreated desperately, thousands would ultimately perish from complete exhaustion, progressive starvation, or summary execution if they failed maintaining the brutal pace. Alan understood clearly that given his chronic physical impairments, he likely possessed minimal chance of surviving prolonged forced marching. However, circumstances offered zero alternative choices. On April 8, 1945, Stalag 17B's gates swung open for the final time. More than 4,000 prisoners commenced a forced westward march, driven away from the advancing Soviet armies. German guards, some appearing barely adolescent, others appearing as battle-weary veterans, escorted the column with rifles held ready for immediate use. The initial days proved absolutely hellish. Men weakened from years of systematic malnutrition were compelled marching 20, sometimes 30 kilometers daily. Feet developed bleeding wounds. Bodies collapsed from complete exhaustion. Those who stumbled and couldn't resume upright position were simply abandoned beside the road. Their ultimate fate remained uncertain and terrible. Alan forced himself continuing forward despite overwhelming pain. Each individual step transmitted sharp agony. Through his inadequately healed leg, his compromised lungs struggled desperately supplying sufficient oxygen. Yet he persevered relentlessly, leaning upon companions when absolutely necessary, receiving their generous support in return. After 5 days of tortuous marching, something extraordinary and completely unexpected occurred. On April 13, 1945, the lengthy column of prisoners encountered a reconnaissance patrol from the 11th Armored Division of the United States Army advancing through Austrian territory. German guards, suddenly recognizing the absolute futility of continuing their retreat, simply dropped their weapons and surrendered without resistance. The prisoners, scarcely believing the miraculous turn of events unfolding before them, stood frozen in stunned, disbelieving silence. Then an American soldier's voice rang out clearly, "You're liberated. The war has concluded for you." The profound silence erupted instantaneously into tears, jubilant screaming, and passionate embraces. Men who had maintained rigid emotional composure throughout years of brutal captivity finally permitted their suppressed feelings to flow freely. Some collapsed to their knees in overwhelming gratitude. Others simply crumpled to the ground, utterly exhausted but finally, gloriously free. Alan Magee, the aviator, who had plummeted from the sky and stubbornly refused dying, stood upright, leaning heavily upon an improvised walking stick, tears streaming uncontrollably down his weathered face. He had survived impossibility not merely once but twice, the catastrophic fall and the brutal captivity. American soldiers immediately distributed food supplies, fresh water, and cigarettes throughout the liberated prisoners. Army medical personnel began systematically evaluating prisoners' conditions, prioritizing the most critical cases requiring urgent attention. When the examining physician heard Alan's complete story, jumping without parachute, Surviving a fall from 20,000 feet, he shook his head in absolute wonderment. "Soldier, you represent a living, breathing miracle," he declared sincerely. Alan underwent transport to a military hospital in France, subsequently to England, and finally back to the United States. The journey consumed several weeks, his body, ravaged thoroughly by years of accumulated trauma and severe deprivation, required extensive comprehensive medical intervention. During May 1945, when Germany formally surrendered unconditionally, Alan was receiving treatment in a military hospital in New York, located merely hours distant from Plainfield. His family received notification that he had returned to American soil. When his mother, Mary Magee, received the telephone call, she collapsed with overwhelming relief. For 2 agonizing years, she had existed in constant, gnawing fear. The initial news classifying him missing in action had proven absolutely agonizing. Discovering his prisoner status brought relief, yet also continued profound anxiety. Now, finally and miraculously, her son had returned home. The family reunion transcended words' capacity for description. Mary barely recognized the gaunt, scarred man who entered the hospital room, then suddenly realized this transformed figure was indeed her son. The robust, healthy 23-year-old who had departed returned at 26, weighing 30 kilograms, less than before deployment, bearing visible scars and countless invisible wounds. But he remained alive, and ultimately that singular fact eclipsed all other considerations. American physicians examining Alan expressed incredulity matching their German counterparts. Dr. Richard Morrison, an experienced orthopedic surgeon possessing extensive trauma expertise, reviewed Alan's medical documentation repeatedly with growing astonishment. The injuries documented by German physicians remain entirely consistent with falling from extreme altitude, he stated carefully. But your survival possess no adequate scientific explanation. By every medical principle, you should have perished, Mr. Magee. I'm aware of that reality, Alan replied with remarkable calmness. Believe me, I'm acutely aware. Alan's extraordinary story attracted significant media attention throughout the nation. Newspapers published detailed articles about the aviator who fell for miles without parachute. Prestigious magazines including Life and the Saturday Evening Post aggressively pursued interviews. Radio stations desperately wanted broadcasting his remarkable account. Alan, profoundly uncomfortable with public attention and scrutiny, declined the overwhelming majority of requests. He fundamentally rejected perceiving himself as any form of hero. I merely survived circumstances, he repeated consistently to persistent journalists. Thousands of other servicemen accomplished far more courageous acts. However, the Army, Air Forces refused, permitting him simply disappearing into anonymity. They desired studying his case extensively, understanding how survival proved possible, and potentially saving future lives through lessons extracted from his experience. Alan cooperated fully with extensive medical investigations. He underwent comprehensive examinations, detailed X-ray imaging, and rigorous physical testing protocols. Physicians meticulously documented every healed fracture, each compromised organ system, every visible scar marking his body. The ultimate conclusion emphasized that an extraordinary combination of factors had preserved Alan's existence: the glass skylight structure that dispersed impact energy across time and space, his youth and excellent physical conditioning preceding the fall, his body's precise positioning during ground impact, and pure statistical fortune impossible to deliberately replicate. Mr. Magee represents the absolute outer boundary of human survival capacity. The official medical report concluded definitively. The likelihood of anyone surviving similar circumstances in future scenarios approaches statistical impossibility. For Alan personally, technical analysis remained secondary to a simpler, more pressing question: what direction should my life take now? Military authorities discharged him from hospital care during August 1945, mere days preceding Japan's formal surrender. World War II officially concluded. Alan possessed his entire life stretching before him, a life he absolutely should not have retained. According to every reasonable expectation, he returned to Plainfield, to his childhood family home. He attempted readjusting to civilian existence, but the transition proved far from easy. Nightmares tormented him relentlessly, replaying the fall endlessly, the captivity's horrors, the comrades who never returned home. Physical pain provided constant reminders of his ordeal. Yet Alan remained fundamentally a survivor. If he had absorbed any lesson through his extraordinary trials, The realization was that life represents something simultaneously precious and fragile, and when fate grants a second chance or third, or fourth, one must never squander that gift carelessly. He commenced rebuilding his existence methodically. Alan Magee devoted many months to comprehensive rehabilitation following his homecoming. Physical therapy addressed a leg and arm that would never achieve complete functional restoration. Breathing exercises strengthened a permanently damaged lung. Less visible but equally crucial therapy addressed profound mental scars. During 1946, he encountered a young woman named Claire at a local veterans' social dance. She knew him simply as Alan, a quiet, gentle man displaying a slight limp and bearing scars across his hands. When he eventually shared his complete story, Claire initially assumed he was joking playfully. "Nobody falls from aircraft and survives such trauma," she said, laughing at the apparent absurdity. "I understand your skepticism," Alan replied with a melancholy smile. Nevertheless, it genuinely occurred. They married during 1947. Alan utilized benefits provided through the G Bill to pursue studies in aviation mechanics, and irony not escaping anyone's notice. The man nearly killed by aircraft was now dedicating his career to repairing them for safe operation. He worked professionally for decades as an aircraft mechanic, initially at a commercial airfield in New Jersey, subsequently for a regional airline company. Colleagues consistently noted that he treated each aircraft with almost spiritual reverence and meticulous care. Alan never accepts shortcuts under any circumstances. One colleague observed admiringly, "He inspects everything 3 times minimum, as though people's lives depend absolutely upon his work. They do depend on it." Alan would reply matter-of-faculty. Alan and Claire welcomed 3 children into their family. He proved a devoted, loving father, though occasionally appearing emotionally distant. The nightmares never ceased entirely. Some nights Claire would discover him sitting alone on the porch, gazing upward at the star-filled sky, clearly mentally transported elsewhere. "You're back there again, aren't you?" she would ask gently, understanding. "I will always carry that place within me," he would answer with complete honesty. Throughout decades, Alan rarely discussed the war voluntarily. Not with his children, not with friends or acquaintances. It represented a chapter of his existence he preferred keeping private and contained. However, during the 1980s, military historians began actively seeking him out, desiring documenting his extraordinary account for posterity. Initially reluctant and resistant, Alan eventually agreed to participate, not seeking personal glory or recognition, but recognizing the story possessed genuine value, not merely as a medical curiosity, but as powerful testament to human resilience and determination. He granted interviews to military historians, participated actively in veterans' gatherings and reunions, and even visited schools speaking about his wartime experiences to younger generations. He consistently emphasized an identical message across all presentations: "I am not a hero, by any definition. Heroes are those brave men who never returned home." During 1993, at 74 years of age, Alan received invitation to France for a ceremony commemorating the 50th anniversary of the strategic bombing campaign. He visited Saint-Nazaire for the first time since that fateful January day in 1943. The train station remained standing, though substantially rebuilt through subsequent decades. The glass skylight that had miraculously preserved his life had been replaced many years earlier with modern materials. Alan stood precisely at the location of his impact, gazing upward through the contemporary glass roof structure. "I plummeted through that opening," he stated softly to his accompanying companion, "traveling at 120 miles per hour. And yet I'm standing here today, breathing, remembering." Local French residents who retained memories of the wartime incident came specifically to greet him. An elderly woman, who had been merely 10 years old in 1943, recalled vividly observing the American aviator who fell from the sky being carried away by German soldiers. "We all absolutely believed you had perished," she explained through an interpreter, her voice trembling with emotion. "When we subsequently learned that you somehow survived, it seemed like witnessing a genuine miracle. It provided us hope that miracles remained possible even amidst war's darkness." Alan found himself profoundly moved by her words. He had never previously considered that his survival might hold meaning for anyone beyond himself and his immediate family. The medical community never ceased studying Alan's case with intense scientific interest. His medical record evolved into one of the most frequently cited documents in literature concerning fall trauma and human injury limits. Emergency physicians, safety equipment designers, Even aerospace engineers studied intensively the specific factors that enabled his survival. Some principles identified impact absorption through yielding materials, force distribution across larger surface area, and extended time duration have subsequently influenced design evolution of everything from automotive airbag systems to spacecraft landing mechanisms. During 2003, at 84 years of age, Alan participated in a television documentary examining survivors of extreme falls throughout history. Production teams created detailed recreation using sophisticated mannequins and advanced physical analysis modeling. The findings confirmed definitively what physicians had declared decades earlier. Alan had survived at the absolute outermost limit of what the human body can possibly endure. Any variation in the multiple critical factors, a marginally different impact angle, more rigid ceiling construction, altered body positioning, and the outcome would have proved instantly fatal. You won the cosmic lottery against impossible odds, the documentary producer told Alan directly. I'm fully aware, Alan replied thoughtfully, and not a single day passes without me feeling profound gratitude for that impossible fortune. Alan Eugene Magee died on December 20, 2003, at 84 years of age. The cause was heart failure, completely unrelated to his wartime wounds sustained 6 decades earlier. He lived 60 full years beyond that impossible January day in 1943. That should have ended his existence. His obituary appearing in the New York Times carried the headline, Alan Magee, aviator who survived 20,000-foot fall, dies at 84. Hundreds attended the funeral services. Veterans wearing vintage uniforms paid solemn respects. Commercial pilots he had personally trained shared fond memories. His grandchildren spoke eloquently of a kind grandfather who possessed extraordinary stories, yet rarely boasted about his remarkable experiences. On the tombstone, the family selected a simple, powerful inscription, Alan E. Magee, January 13, 1919, December 20, 2003, Gunner. USAFT. He refused to die. Alan's story continues fascinating and inspiring new generations. It receives study in medical schools as an extreme case of survival biology. It's recounted in military history courses as an example of human resilience under impossible conditions. It's shared in motivational programs as testament that seemingly hopeless situations sometimes possess unexpected solutions. However, perhaps the most significant legacy remains simpler and more personally profound. Alan proved definitively that even when all appears lost, when physics and probability declare zero hope exists, the human spirit sometimes discovers a path forward. He fell from 20,000 feet without parachute. He struck the ground traveling at speeds that should have killed him instantaneously. He survived with injuries that physicians deemed incompatible with continued life. He endured years of brutal captivity under horrific conditions, and he subsequently lived 6 full, meaningful decades afterward. Alan Magee was no superhero. He was an ordinary man who confronted extraordinary circumstances and simply refused surrendering at every critical juncture. Trapped in the burning aircraft, falling through empty sky, fighting for survival in the prisoner of war camp, he made conscious choice to continue fighting. And that choice, repeated countless times through unimaginable trials, made all the difference ultimately. His story reminds us that human resilience possesses limits we don't fully comprehend. That courage doesn't mean fear's absence, but action despite it. And that sometimes, against all conceivable odds, miracles genuinely happen. Alan Eugene Magee fell from the sky and lived to share the tale, not because he was merely lucky, though fortune certainly participated, not because he was innately special, though he demonstrated extraordinary resilience. He survived because when faced with certain death, he chose living, and then he repeated that choice again and again, every single day, in every possible way, until the natural conclusion of a long, well-lived life. The boy from Plainfield who dreamed of flying finally achieved his dream in a manner no one could have predicted, and through that process he became an eternal symbol that the human spirit, when truly tested, can withstand the unimaginable.